When Ethan Kade appeared at the entrance to Marble Canyon Ranger Station in August, he was almost unrecognizable, barefoot, emaciated, with long hair hanging down to his chest and draped in a tattered piece of cloth in place of clothing. The man had gone missing 5 years earlier in one of the most treacherous sections of the Colorado River. A man everyone believed was dead, but the most terrifying thing was not his appearance. The most terrifying thing was what he said about those 5 years, about what had happened in the darkness, and about who might still be alive out there, deep in the canyon. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. On the morning of Tuesday, June 17, 2008, 29-year-old Ethan Kade was at the launch area of Lee's Ferry at 7:30 a.m., where the early summer air of the Colorado Plateau was still cool and dry, typical of the days before the rafting season became crowded. Ethan had been preparing for this solo kayak trip for weeks. He was not the type to seek impulsive adventure moments, but rather a meticulous planner who followed procedures rigorously. The kayak had been discreetly checked for water tightness. The tie-downs were properly aligned, safety gear and the spot device were correctly activated. Waterproof topographic maps were clearly marked with the rapid sections, and the gear was weight distributed sensibly based on years of accumulated experience. Ethan's goal was to run Marble Canyon on the first day and reach Phantom Ranch by the following evening. At noon that same day, he was spotted by a group of tourists standing on the trail near Navajo Bridge as he brought the kayak down to the sandbar below the bridge to take a short break and recheck his equipment. During later verification, one witness said he noticed Ethan because of his steady posture and focus while observing the water, as if he was fully in control of his journey. At this sandbar, they also observed the appearance of a strange man wearing a gray baseball cap, standing next to an old silver pickup truck. The distance was too far for more detailed identification, but the witness confirmed there was a brief interaction between the two. A few minutes later, Ethan pushed the kayak into the water and continued paddling into the narrow canyon section, where the sheer rock walls quickly swallowed the view of anyone watching from above the bridge. This was the last confirmed contact with him. The weather that day was stable, with no signs of sudden changes that could endanger an experienced kayaker. Therefore, Ethan stopping sending spot signals from afternoon into evening initially caused concern for his family, though they still hoped it was just a device malfunction or loss of signal in the narrow canyon sections. However, by the following evening, June 18th, Ethan still had not appeared at the agreed-upon rendezvous point and had sent no updates. The family continued waiting into the morning of June 19th, hoping he had only been delayed by difficult terrain or had stopped to rest for safety, but the phone remained silent and there was no indication he was still on the journey. By noon, Ethan's parents officially contacted the National Park Service to report him missing. Upon receiving this information, the National Park Service's Rescue Division immediately shifted to emergency response mode, beginning with the initial data collection process with the focus on precisely determining the route Ethan was expected to follow, based on the trip plan he had left before departing from Lee's Ferry. NPS staff retrieved the last recorded transmission from the spot device that Ethan had reliably used on previous trips, while cross-referencing it with the standard water route that an experienced kayaker would typically choose when passing through the early section of Marble Canyon, where the Colorado flows swiftly but within his skill level. Iltad. Saybordi. Segawad Caesar Saymerd Charmos Turkin, that shoved the plan to perish Rhodesian Surd, flow velocity, over the past 24 hours. Savers of fast 24 hours, forecasted changes in discharge from Glen Canyon Dam, and average hourly wind direction. Data recorded on June 18 and 19 showed a slight rise in water level toward late afternoon, creating the possibility that floating objects would be carried farther than in standard models typically used in ordinary accident cases. From that basis, the analysis team produced an estimated displacement range map for an empty kayak over 12 to 18 hours, divided into 3 search bands ranked by priority level. For field deployment, NPS mobilized helicopters from Page and jet boats from Marble Canyon to sweep along the river from mile 0 to mile 12, while a ground SR team was assigned to access shoreline observation points to identify any suspicious signs, such as drifting items, fresh drag marks in the sand, or footprints deviating from usual trails. The search plan for the first 48 hours was built on a funnel model, in which the upstream area near Navajo Bridge was considered the core zone, since it was the last point. Ethan was directly seen, while the downstream area around mile 9 and mile 10 was also prioritized due to the likelihood that current could carry an uncontrolled kayak. The coordination team decided to conduct 3 helicopter sweeps on the first day, the first at low altitude to look for survival signs, the second at medium altitude to identify clusters of foreign objects on the water surface, and the third in late afternoon to compare flow changes. In parallel, boat teams were divided by river segments to scour rock pockets, narrow sandbars, and eddies capable of trapping floating objects. When the first search day ended without new information, NPS moved to the expansion phase, adding personnel and opening additional ground search branches along canyon rim trails to ensure every possibility within the initial 48 hours was systematically considered without overlooking any trace potentially related to Ethan's final journey. On the morning of the second search day, as SAR teams continued expanding the range according to the funnel model established the previous day, a jet boat team moving along the Colorado River through the narrow water section of Marble Canyon detected an unusual floating object in the mile 9 area, positioned right at a mild eddy where currents intersected. Upon closer approach, the SR team identified the object as the exact kayak Ethan Kade had used on the trip, capsized with the stern facing the rock shore and the bow pointing out into the main current. The kayak's appearance at this location immediately became a critical benchmark in reassessing the entire displacement range the analysis team had predicted in the initial phase. After securing the kayak to prevent further drifting, the SR team conducted a structural inspection of the hull, including the composite surface, bow and stern edges, storage compartments, and the condition of the tie-down system. There were no signs of heavy impact against rocks, something that typically occurs when a kayak loses control and is genuinely swept away by the current in the narrow canyon area. The compartments showed no tearing or unusual deformation, indicating the kayak had not endured significant compressive force from rapids. More importantly, the bow tie-down remained intact, neither twisted nor stretched in the manner usually left by an accidental capsize. This characteristic led the technical team to preliminarily rule out the possibility of the kayak self-capsizing due to current. Instead, the position and condition of the hull suggested the kayak may have been placed or held in the water in a way inconsistent with the previously calculated natural drift model. After completing the initial inspection, the SR team established a 100-meter scene radius around the discovery site to search for additional supporting evidence. This radius was determined based on the average flow direction in the mile 9 area, the degree of edge eddying, and the potential for secondary objects to drift along as the kayak slowly rotated in the water. SARA members scanned the water surface for any debris, fiber material traces, rock scrapes, or small objects that could have been carried with the kayak. The elevated ground team observing from the canyon rim noted no signs of displaced soil or foot slippage at points leading down to the water, making it unlikely that Ethan had climbed onto rock surfaces at this location. Notably, Mile 9 was not within the high probability group, according to the initial water flow simulation system. This made the discovery the first true anomaly, directly impacting the reassessment of the entire search direction. Although the exact nature of the anomaly could not yet be concluded, the SAR coordination team noted this deviation as a key factor and directed the opening of a new search branch extending upstream toward Navajo Bridge, in case the kayak had been displaced by a mechanism other than natural current. This action amounted to revising assumptions about the time frame and physical variables related to Ethan's disappearance. shifting focus to determining whether the kayak had drifted to mile 9 on its own or had been affected in a way not yet understood at that point. After the kayak was found at mile 9 and recorded as the first anomaly potentially affecting the initial drift assumption, the SR coordination team decided to return to the last point where Ethan appeared under Navajo Bridge to conduct a more detailed survey of the sandbar area where he had stopped at noon on June 17. The objective was to determine whether any event at this sandbar, before Ethan continued his journey, could explain the capsized kayak ending up at a position inconsistent with the calculated natural drift model. Upon arrival, the SR team cordoned off the sandbar area and planned a grid search, dividing the zone into small cells based on water flow, sand surface compaction, and wind direction over the preceding 2 days. The field team began documenting all impressions in the sand, including the spot where Ethan may have set the kayak during his rest, footprints entering and exiting the water's edge, and deeper impressions near the brush area on the north side of the sandbar. Footprints matching the size of Ethan's shoes were classified first. Length, width, and stride distance were compared against family descriptions and similar shoe samples they provided. Ethan's prints showed a simple path. He stepped from the water's edge onto the sandbar, paused at a slightly higher point above the water, then returned to the kayak. However, the survey team quickly discovered a second group of footprints not part of Ethan's movement sequence. These prints were larger in size, showed uneven pressure distribution, and headed off toward the tree line along the edge of the sandbar, completely different from the typical in-and-out water path of a kayaker taking a break. Notably, near this group of footprints appeared a long drag mark in the sand, extending deep into the brush edge. The drag mark was straight and consistent, suggesting the possibility of a heavy object being pulled in that direction. The analysis team ruled out the drag mark being caused by animals or sliding equipment, as the depth and compaction did not match common patterns. In parallel, they created a 3-layer diagram. The first layer recorded all footprints, the second classified them by size and direction of travel. The third marked drag marks and areas of disturbed sand. This diagramming clearly identified the sequence of events that had occurred on the sandbar, with particular note of the single intersection point between Ethan's path and the other individual's path. This intersection occurred at one unique spot, where the two sets of footprints slightly overlapped before diverging in different directions. Ethan turned back toward the water, while the larger footprint group veered into the brush. Based on the shape and compaction of the second set, the SR team confirmed these were not Ethan's prints, and also not those of the tourists who had confirmed their presence on the trail above the bridge at that time. Sand surface analysis results showed the larger footprint group appeared after Ethan entered the canyon, but before strong winds blew through the area on the evening of June 17, allowing the field team to determine these prints belonged to an as-yet unidentified individual present at the sandbar during a time frame directly related to Ethan's final journey. These findings led the coordination team to conclude that the simple accident hypothesis no longer fit the on-site evidence. Instead, the indicators pointed to the possibility of third-party involvement, at minimum, the presence of another individual who had walked on the sandbar during the same time window. As a result, the SR team officially opened a new analysis branch called Interaction Scenario, focusing on evaluating what role any interaction between Ethan and this unidentified individual may have played in his disappearance, as well as whether the group of footprints and the drag mark in the sand could be connected to the displacement of the kayak or to any event that occurred after Ethan left the brief rest stop and continued into Marble Canyon. Based on the unusual traces obtained at the sandbar beneath Navajo Bridge, the SR teams and NPS coordinators shifted to the witness verification step to supplement off-site information, starting with a comprehensive review of all visitors present in the bridge area on June 17, 2008. Interview teams were stationed at the parking lot above the bridge and along the observation trail, collecting statements from pedestrians, fishermen, RV drivers, and a group of landscape photographers who frequently visited the area due to the beautiful view down to the sandbar and river surface. Among these witnesses, several confirmed seeing an old silver pickup truck parked at the edge of the sandbar around midday, coinciding with the time Ethan brought his kayak ashore. However, the great distance and harsh glare when looking down from the bridge level made it impossible for most to describe the license plate or the man standing next to the vehicle clearly. One witness reported seeing a short-statured figure wearing a gray baseball cap moving between the truck and the sandbar for a brief period, but could not determine whether this individual approached Ethan in an unusual manner or simply appeared coincidentally. To supplement data from imaging sources, NPS coordinated with local businesses to review security camera footage at Marble Canyon Lodge, which had an angle from the parking lot overlooking the main road, and a small gas station a few hundred meters away. Due to the limited recording technology in 2008, the cameras captured only low-resolution frames, lacking sufficient sharpness to identify license plates or faces. Nevertheless, a segment recorded between 11:30 and 12:10 showed a silver pickup with a shape matching the witness description passing through the area in the direction of the bridge, then turning around and heading back approximately 20-30 minutes later. Motion analysis of the vehicle indicated it did not remain in the camera's field long enough to gather additional details, and no unique identifying features were visible on the tail or front end. When cross-referencing the camera imagery with witness descriptions from the sandbar, the analysis team concluded there was a strong possibility the two observations referred to the same vehicle, but the identifying characteristics were too limited to establish a definitive correlation. At the same time, comparing the pickup's travel times and direction with the last sighting of Ethan placed them within the relevant time frame, though still insufficient to meet the threshold for a third-party intervention hypothesis under criminal case opening standards. Additional imaging materials from vehicles traveling on US 89 including dashcam footage from tourist vehicles and photographs taken by visitors, were also reviewed but yielded no clear evidence of the gray-capped man or the pickup in a suspicious state. When all collected data was entered into the time, location analysis system, it only indicated the presence of a potentially related vehicle without identifying the driver, purpose of stopping, or any direct connection to Ethan. Since there was no specific evidence of criminal behavior or forced contact, NPS concluded that the peripheral data at this stage held only supplementary reference value for situational assessment, but did not meet the criteria to reclassify the case as a criminal investigation. This required the coordinators to maintain the assumption of a natural environment disappearance, while noting the cluster of data regarding the pickup and gray-capped man in a special remarks section for follow-up, in case these traces gained significance in later search developments. Over the next 10 days following the missing person report, SR teams sustained high-intensity searches along the Colorado River corridor and adjacent areas, but recovered no additional traces beyond the capsized kayak at mile 9 and the puzzling footprints at the sandbar beneath Navajo Bridge. All efforts to expand the search, including probing rock crevices, sweeping the water surface with jet boats, aerial observation by helicopter, and checking natural debris collection points along the flow, produced no results the coordination team could consider new evidence. Ground teams swept rim trails along the canyon edges to rule out Ethan having left the river in a disoriented state, but found no fresh shoe prints, displaced soil rock marks, or terrain changes suggesting his presence after leaving the sandbar. Based on experience with similar disappearances in the region, the SR coordination team assessed that after 10 days without survival signals or objective evidence, the probability of the subject being alive had fallen below the threshold for maintaining emergency-level search. NPS therefore initiated search downgrading procedures, transitioning operations from emergency status to lost presumed drowned mode, meaning the subject was presumed deceased by drowning despite no body recovery. This process included reducing helicopter participation, narrowing watercraft sweep areas, and returning ground SR teams to standby after completing the final segmented sweep. An updated hydrological analysis indicated that in some cases bodies could become trapped in underwater rock crevices or drawn into deep river eddies for weeks or even months, making non-recovery in the initial phase not uncommon. On that basis, and absent any evidence meeting legal standards for third-party involvement, NPS finalized the summary report, concluding that Ethan Kade's disappearance was temporarily classified as an unconfirmed water-related fatality. The file was transferred to Cold Case 2008 status, with supplementary notes on the unusual traces collected at the sandbar and the old pickup appearing in the same timeframe, though insufficient to open a criminal investigation at that point. 5 years after the file was moved to Cold Case 2008 status, on the morning of August 29, 2013, a staff member at Marble Canyon Ranger Station reported the appearance of an individual in a state of extreme exhaustion, staggering gait, and severely torn and frayed clothing, as though having endured a prolonged period in harsh wilderness conditions. The person was seen walking along the roadside near the service buildings, repeatedly shielding their eyes from the intense sun and displaying spatial disorientation. Upon being assisted into a shaded area, on-duty staff observed that the man's facial features and build closely matched the archived image of Ethan Kade, still held in the cold case file at the station. After a quick comparison with Ethan's 2008 photograph, the staff member confirmed a high enough similarity to proceed with basic identification per internal protocol. When asked his name, the man responded slowly, in a weak voice, repeating only the phrase Ethan Kade, before slumping into a chair. Direct visual identification was further reinforced by matching 3 distinctive markers: a mole beneath the left jawline, a small scar on the right thumb, and the unusual curvature of the left ear rim, all consistent with descriptions in Ethan's missing person file. The ranger immediately drafted a report documenting the appearance of an individual highly likely to be the subject previously presumed drowned 5 years earlier. While awaiting local medical team support, the ranger noted numerous abnormal physical signs: pallid skin, severe weight loss, unsteady posture, sluggish reflexes, and heightened light sensitivity. The man's clothing, though old and worn, was inappropriate for late summer desert conditions and showed wear patterns indicating very long-term use in unstable environments. Upon arrival, EMTs documented additional features: pronounced leg muscle atrophy, restricted gait, abnormally rapid heart rate, and avoidance of physical contact, all consistent with recent escape from extreme survival conditions rather than short-term disorientation or getting lost. Due to the extraordinary nature of the appearance, the ranger station promptly notified the National Park Service and requested guidance from the Coordination Office, as the event directly related to a previously closed missing person file. After receiving the station's report and initial medical assessment, NPS quickly determined that the man's physical condition was entirely incompatible with the 2008 drowning presumption. Furthermore, the circumstances of his reappearance ruled out spontaneous return or ordinary survival skill endurance. Recognizing the case exceeded routine rescue scope, NPS immediately transferred the file to the FBI per protocols for unusual reappearances linked to long-term missing persons cases. Upon FBI acceptance and request for comprehensive medical evaluation, Ethan was transferred to a medical facility equipped for in-depth examinations. There, the medical team initiated an extended series of assessments to determine physiological status, extent of injuries, and living conditions throughout his 5-year absence. Even in the initial evaluation, clinical signs indicated Ethan's injuries could not align with a water accident victim. Instead, his overall physical deterioration closely matched a pattern of long-term confinement in a low-light, restricted movement, chronically malnourished environment. Ethan's skin tone was abnormally pale compared to 2008 records, a classic sign of extremely low natural light exposure over an extended period. Blood vitamin D levels fell below the minimum allowable threshold, while pigment distribution on sun-exposed areas face and arms showed no meaningful direct light exposure for months or even years. Concurrently, his BMI upon intake was far below normal adult levels, with severe muscle mass loss, particularly in the leg and lumbar groups, indicative of prolonged confinement in confined space or sustained sitting-lying postures. Rehabilitation specialists noted symmetrical lower limb muscle atrophy, accompanied by diminished patellar reflexes, signaling inability to perform normal ambulation for a long duration, not merely recent weeks. Close examination of the ankles revealed two circular scars of consistent diameter with hardened scar tissue rims from repeated friction. The scar morphology was consistent with metal cable or shackle restraint over multiple years, possibly with varying tension depending on activity and weather. For forensic medical experts, this scar pattern could not result from natural accident or river drifting, but matched forced immobilization at a fixed position over an extended period. Whole-body X-ray and CT scans provided another critical finding. Ethan had sustained a left forearm fracture, with estimated timing aligning with the first year of disappearance. The fracture was malaligned and had healed with axial deviation in the absence of medical intervention, a scenario occurring only when the victim received no hospital care or professional treatment. Minor healed cracks on right ribs, 9 and 10, showed signs of blunt force trauma inconsistent with water impact or rock entrapment in the riverbed. The trauma specialist concluded that the overall injury pattern followed no drowning or high-flow river drift model, no aspiration pneumonia, no diffuse contusion patterns from repeated water-rock impacts, and no evidence consistent with entrapment in a rock crevice followed by self-extrication. Soft tissue examination revealed chronic cellular dehydration, near total subcutaneous fat depletion, and nail hair structures indicative of prolonged nutritional deficit. Forensic nutritionists assessed that long-term caloric intake met only bare minimum survival levels, lacking essential vitamins and minerals, forming a dietary profile typical of complete external food source control. When all medical data were considered together, the expert team concluded that Ethan had not merely survived adverse conditions, but existed in a cyclical controlled environment, low light, restricted movement, minimal rations, no medical care, and evidence of restraint devices. No injury element matched water accident, while the entire injury pattern aligned almost perfectly with long-term captivity. The official medical report to the FBI therefore stated that the case no longer fit the lost presumed drowned hypothesis. Instead, the full forensic data required reclassification to long-term captivity investigation, an inquiry into prolonged forced confinement, with entirely different legal implications than a standard disappearance. This reclassification marked a major turning point in the case, requiring the FBI to expand the investigation scope, re-examine all 2008 data, and prioritize possibilities previously not considered high priority. After the file was reclassified and the medical report confirmed signs consistent with the pattern of long-term captivity, the FBI proceeded to the next step, obtaining Ethan's initial statement using the forensic interviewing process, employing information elicitation techniques designed for victims who have experienced prolonged trauma. In the first session, investigators focused on basic questions to establish the sequence of events from the moment Ethan left the beach under Navajo Bridge at noon on June 17, 2008, until he reappeared at Marble Canyon Ranger Station in 2013. However, the initial statement Ethan provided was quite fragmented, containing many time gaps and lacking any clear event markers that aligned with the documented data from the 2008 file. When asked about the period immediately after leaving the beach, Ethan stated that he might have flipped the kayak due to a sudden surge of water, then didn't remember anything else, and when he came to, he found himself in a dark place. It's up and darkened. This description immediately conflicted with the fact that his kayak was found at mile 9 in a condition showing no signs of heavy impact, with untwisted tie-downs and an undamaged storage compartment, a configuration completely inconsistent with a capsize caused by current. Ethan also could not explain why his spot device stopped transmitting signals right after leaving the beach, even though later technical checks showed the device was not damaged by impact or submersion. The gaps in his statement became even clearer when cross-referenced with the 2008 flow forecast table. Ethan described that he might have drifted farther than expected, but the timing and distance he mentioned did not match any drift model for that period, especially since the kayak was found at a location that a freely floating object could not have reached within the time frame he gave. Investigators also noted several other illogical points. Ethan could not recall what items he was carrying, could not determine the time of sunset that day, and particularly could not recall any details about the period before his reappearance in 2013, beyond vague descriptions of darkness and confined space. All of this indicated severe fragmentation of his memory, consistent with what the medical team had stated in their report: consequences of prolonged stress, lack of light, and possible complete isolation in a confinement environment. During the analysis of the statement, the FBI noted Ethan's pattern of avoidance when directly asked about any other individuals present at the beach. Each time he was questioned about the man in the gray hat that a witness had seen, Ethan responded by changing the subject, saying he didn't remember, or simply remaining silent, even though other memory fragments were also hazy but did not trigger such pronounced avoidance reactions. This asymmetry in response was assessed as a potential indicator of threat or prolonged psychological pressure that prevented the victim from daring to describe the truth, particularly when questions concerned the harmful agent. To ensure objectivity, the forensic interviewing team compared Ethan's statement with the entire 2008 dataset, including kayak location, footprints at the beach, spot signal cessation time, witness observations, water flow data, and NPS search logs. The results showed that Ethan's entire initial statement failed to match any confirmed facts. Investigators concluded that this state of the statement was not due to active deception, but was far more likely the result of information control, prolonged isolation, or threatening influence that made the victim unable or unwilling to fully recall what had happened. This observation was entered into the record, with a note that discrepancies in the statement must be considered in the context of severe psychological trauma and possible coercion, thereby establishing that the victim's account could only be accurately evaluated when placed alongside physical evidence and objective data, rather than used as the sole source for reconstructing events. After analyzing Ethan's initial statement and determining that the details he provided did not match any field data collected in 2008, the FBI moved to the next step in the reinvestigation process, reanalyzing the scene, using more advanced hydraulic simulation technology than what was available at the time of the disappearance. Invited experts used the RiverFlow 2D model, a two-dimensional flow simulation software capable of reconstructing the movement of floating objects based on water density, riverbed topography, surface roughness, discharge rates from Glen Canyon Dam, and hourly wind force variations. Input data included actual parameters from June 2008, stored in the U.S. Geological Survey's hydrologic archive, along with riverbed topographic maps of the area from mile 0 to mile 12. The goal was to determine whether Ethan's kayak could have drifted on its own from the beach under Navajo Bridge to the recovery location at mile 9 within the expected time frame. Results from multiple simulation runs consistently reached the same conclusion: an empty kayak, without striking obstacles and without any differential initial propulsion, could not follow the actual recorded trajectory from 2008. In most models, the kayak either became lodged in the mile 3-4 area due to branching currents, or continued drifting farther to mile 11-12 when caught in the main flow, depending on hourly discharge levels. No scenario showed the kayak ending precisely at mile 9 in a stable upside-down position without heavy rock impacts. This reinforced the conclusion that the kayak's found position was not the result of natural current, but was likely influenced by an external force or deliberately placed there after being moved from its original location. This finding gained further significance when the FBI's forensic geology team reanalyzed soil samples taken from the kayak's hull in 2008, which had been stored in evidence but never tested with today's sophisticated mineral analysis technologies. The sample was separated by grain size and analyzed for mineral composition using X-ray diffraction and X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy. Results showed that the fine dust layer adhering to the forward hull was not characteristic of Marble Canyon River sediment, but carried mineral signatures of the Paria Plateau region, an area far from the river channel and only accessible by dirt road or motorized vehicle. Notably, the presence of montmorillonite and dolomite in small crystalline form in the soil sample was entirely consistent with Paria Plateau geology and did not match the soil composition along the Colorado River sections Ethan was expected to pass through. The fact that a river travel kayak bore traces of soil from a high plateau distant from the flow led investigators to completely rule out random soil splash from Ethan's shoes or gear. Instead, the results indicated that the kayak had directly contacted ground surface in a completely different area before being found at mile 9. When juxtaposing the river flow 2D simulation results with the mineral analysis, the FBI concluded that the kayak had not only been diverted from its natural trajectory, but had been moved by an intentional mechanism. The presence of Paria Plateau soil on the kayak, an area inaccessible by river, suggested that the kayak had likely been pulled ashore, transported by vehicle, and then placed back into the water at mile 9, to create a false scene or obscure the victim's actual movement in the initial hours after leaving the beach. From these analyses, the investigative team officially opened a new line of inquiry named forced transportation, focusing on the hypothesis that Ethan was removed from the river area by motorized vehicle, transported to a location off his intended route, and that the kayak was manipulated or abandoned in a manner designed to mislead search efforts. This line of inquiry marked a significant shift from considering a possible water accident to identifying signs of deliberate action, third-party intervention, and the likely existence of an entirely different travel route not covered in the 2008 SAR map. Based on the results of the forced transportation line of inquiry, the FBI proceeded to build a behavioral profile focused on characteristics likely to fit someone who removed Ethan from the Colorado River area, moved him overland, and manipulated the scene at mile 9. FBI behavioral experts identified several core elements. The perpetrator would need deep knowledge of Marble Canyon terrain, especially the ability to identify secondary access routes to the river that avoided heavy observation, familiarity with the Paria Plateau area, where the distinctive soil on the kayak originated, a tendency to operate alone, avoid communication, and frequently appear in remote areas, and most importantly, use of a vehicle suitable for the terrain, typically an older pickup with sufficient towing capacity to transport a kayak while remaining inconspicuous at narrow dirt road entry/exit points. Using these criteria, the FBI coordinated with the Coconino County Sheriff's Office and highway patrol stations to extract the full list of vehicles that moved through the area on June 17, 2008. Since the area around Navajo Bridge and Marble Canyon lacked modern traffic cameras at the time, the list was compiled from 3 main sources: manual patrol officer logs, Marble Canyon area gas station receipts, and vehicle registration information of residents within a 30-mile radius of Ethan's last sighting. From this, the analysis team obtained a list of 12 owners of silver or gray pickups, matching the vague witness description of a vehicle seen parked at the edge of the beach. This list included local residents, road maintenance workers, tour guides, and several individuals who regularly passed through the area for work. The next step was cross-referencing these individuals' travel histories within the 48-hour window before and after Ethan's disappearance. The FBI checked fuel receipts, work logs, secondary witness statements, and personal activity records to rule out cases with solid alibis. 7 of the 12 were quickly eliminated due to clear alibi evidence. Some were working at distant resorts. Some were participating in group activities with witnesses. 1 was out of state during Ethan's last sighting. The remaining 5 lacked definitive alibis, but 4 of them had travel histories and lifestyle patterns that suggested no isolating or unusual behavior. Only 1 individual matched the entire behavioral profile: Caleb Rourke, male, born 1974, living alone in a temporary residence on the edge of the desert, approximately 15 miles from Paria Plateau. Rourke's residency record showed he moved to the area in 2005, worked irregular seasonal jobs, and rarely interacted with the community. Preliminary investigation also noted that Rourke owned an older silver pickup, manufactured in the late 1980s, matching the witness description seen at the beach on the day Ethan disappeared. When examining Rourke's purchase history at local stores during 2007-2008, the FBI observed cyclical transactions involving fuel, canned food, and light mechanical supplies, all consistent with someone spending extended time traveling between remote areas. More notably, Rourke had been reported in 2006 and 2007 for appearing unusually near hiking groups deep in the wilderness, though no clear criminal behavior was established under the law. This profile, when combined with the geographic data and soil source found on the kayak, made Rourke the suspect with the highest degree of fit to the forced transportation hypothesis. Although direct evidence was lacking, the FBI concluded that Caleb Rourke was the only individual on the list with the opportunity, timing, and capability to approach Ethan, move the kayak, and remove the victim from the river area undetected. Accordingly, Rourke was placed in the priority suspect category and became the focus of the subsequent investigation phase, as the FBI began gathering deeper information on his behavior, habits, and travel history during the time coinciding with Ethan's disappearance. After identifying Caleb Rourke as the priority suspect based on the behavioral profile and vehicle match, the FBI began the pre-arrest investigation phase to collect objective facts related to his residency history, travel habits, and signs of interaction with the area where Ethan disappeared. Administrative records showed Rourke moved to a temporary residence about 15 miles from the Paria Plateau edge in 2005, a remote, isolated location completely separate from the nearest major settlement within 30 miles. From that time until 2007, reports from hikers and rangers documented multiple instances of Rourke appearing on secluded trails, often observing hikers from a distance or briefly following them before disappearing before being approached. These reports were insufficient to constitute criminal behavior, but outlined a pattern of concealment, preference for solitary movement, and familiarity with the terrain, precisely matching the behavioral profile constructed earlier. When analyzing purchase data, the FBI discovered an additional noteworthy sequence. Receipts from convenience stores and gas stations in the region showed Rourke buying fuel on fixed days of the month, and over multiple years, the amount of fuel purchased exceeded what was necessary for someone traveling only near home. Additionally, transaction records showed regular small but consistent purchases of long shelf-life canned goods, consistent with a self-sufficient lifestyle or activity in areas far from stores. Most importantly, many receipts recorded Rourke's purchases of medium-weight chains and metal locks, items unrelated to his seasonal work, but appearing with a frequency that was difficult to explain, especially in the period before and after Ethan's disappearance. With this data, the FBI shifted analysis toward Rourke's movement patterns. Through interviews with scattered residents in the area, combined with fuel receipts and cell tower location data, the team determined that he frequently traveled a dirt road from his residence to the Paria Plateau edge, then looped down secondary trails that could connect to Colorado River access points without much observation from main tourist areas. Several points along this route significantly overlapped with the area where Paria soil adhered to the kayak, indicating Rourke had access to locations known only to locals familiar with the terrain. Verification of Rourke's potential access to the beach where Ethan was last seen was conducted thoroughly. Based on his pickup's characteristics and the shape of secondary turnoffs, the FBI ran time-of-travel simulations between Rourke's home and the area under Navajo Bridge on June 17, 2008. The simulation showed he could fully have appeared at the beach around noon that day without leaving much trace, especially if using routes through less traveled dirt sections. This became even more noteworthy when paired with the witness statement describing a silver pickup appearing in the beach area at the exact time Ethan stopped before continuing his journey. To strengthen this assessment, the FBI compared faint tire impressions found at 3 stop points along the dirt route with Rourke's vehicle tire samples and noted some similarities in tread spacing and wear depth, though not sufficient to constitute conclusive evidence. Synthesizing all data, the FBI concluded that Rourke not only matched the behavioral profile but also possessed the geographic conditions, lifestyle habits, and access capability consistent with the hypothesis that he had been present in the area of Ethan's disappearance and may have played a role in removing the victim from the Colorado River. Based on the test results of the soil sample collected from the kayak in comparison via spectroscopy, the FBI's forensic geology team confirmed an almost perfect match between the minerals adhering to the kayak hull and the characteristic soil composition of Paria Canyon, where there is the presence of fine crystalline montmorillonite, impure dolomite, and thermally weathered placer sand grains specific to the plateau region. This type of soil could not naturally occur along the Colorado River banks in the route Ethan was expected to take, nor could it have been splashed onto the kayak by the paddler's movements. This means the kayak must have directly contacted the ground in Paria Canyon or the plateau edge area before being returned to Mile 9. From this, the analysis team opened a new investigative branch focused on identifying a plausible route that a suspect could have used to remove Ethan and the kayak from the sandbar below Navajo Bridge, move inland onto the Paria Plateau, then return and place the kayak back into the river without drawing attention. The FBI constructed a 2-layer map, the first layer consisting of dirt roads suitable for an older pickup truck like Caleb Rourke's. The second layer being the network of natural trails leading from main roads into small slots within Paria Canyon. Time of travel analysis, based on average off-road vehicle speed models, showed that the suspect could have transported Ethan from the sandbar to the western slot area of Paria Canyon in only 40 to 55 minutes, if using the narrow dirt routes commonly used by locals and rarely accessed by tourists. This movement pattern also aligned with Rourke's cyclical fuel purchase data, which indicated he regularly made short, consistent round trips within the same area. To narrow the search scope, the FBI collaborated with the U.S. Geological Survey to utilize airborne LiDAR data collected in 2012, which allowed high-precision reconstruction of terrain structure and detection of minor anomalies beneath sparse vegetation. When scanning a 16-mile swath from the edge of Paria Plateau to the narrow slot branches of Paria Canyon, the analysis team identified 3 areas with anomalies. 2 areas showed slight concave structures consistent with natural post-heavy rain subsidence, and a third area displayed a faint rectangular shape beneath shallow sediment, a geometry not typically reflective of natural geological features. This third area measured approximately 3.5 meters and was located in a small slot accessible only via a turnoff from a dirt road that Rourke frequently used. Notably, this location featured a rare flat surface in Paria Canyon, providing conditions suitable for placing an artificial object without it being dislodged by slides or erosion over time. When overlaying the plausible travel route map for Rourke onto this anomalous location, the FBI determined that the path from his residence to this site was not only feasible but also matched fuel purchase timestamps and witness sightings of an older pickup truck traveling in the area over multiple years. This suspect area also fell within the zone confirmed to have soil matching the kayak sample analysis, thereby increasing the probability of direct relevance to the case. For further validation, The analysis team reviewed multi-year satellite imagery, including from 2007-2013. Although resolution did not reveal fine details, the persistent presence of an unchanged shadow blob over years suggested a covered or shallowly buried artificial structure. Small trails leading into the area also showed repeated use signatures over time, though not clear enough to determine frequency or exact timing. From the synthesized data, the FBI established the hypothesis that the suspect may have used this trail as the primary route to transport Ethan into Paria Canyon while moving the kayak to an intermediate location before returning it to the river. The distance from the sandbar to the anomalous site aligned with the spot signal loss window and the time when SAR forces began deployment the following day. To assess access conditions, the FBI simulated field scenarios. An experienced off-road driver would need only 20-25 minutes to travel from the main dirt road to the suspect point, with sufficient space to turn around or stop without detection from primary tourist routes. Geographic factors suggested the site could be used to conceal an object or sustain activity undetected. After determining a high level of suspicion, the FBI officially designated this area as Priority Site A on the investigative map. With its anomalous rectangular structure, isolated position, compatible trail connections for pickup travel, and matching mineral signature from the soil sample, Priority Site A became the first location requiring on-site survey. Access, however, required careful preparation due to steep terrain and the possibility that the ground had been altered in ways that could be hazardous or result in evidence loss if not handled according to proper protocol. The FBI began preparations for a direct survey, mobilizing an engineering team, field geologists, and tactical support for approach in order to definitively determine the nature of the anomalous structure and its potential connection to Ethan Kade's multi-year disappearance. When Priority Site A was identified as the location with direct potential relevance to the suspect's anomalous travel route and the source of the soil adhering to Ethan's kayak, the FBI immediately deployed a field approach plan with the objective of verifying the nature of the rectangular structure detected via LiDAR data. To avoid disturbing evidence, the engineering team selected a foot approach via the narrow trail into the small slot of Paria Canyon, using lightweight off-road vehicles to transport survey equipment, but stopping approximately 500 meters from the suspect site, then proceeding on foot in a limited formation to minimize ground vibration that could alter shallow sediment structure. Upon reaching the site, initial observations confirmed the existence of a half-buried artificial structure. The ground surface showed slight rectangular subsidence, matching the LiDAR signature, with sand and fine dust unusually leveled and inconsistent with natural low vegetation distribution in the area. After using geological probes to check subsurface voids, the survey team determined a large metal object lay just beneath a 20-30 centimeters thick sediment layer. Excavation was conducted in a grid pattern, removing thin soil layers incrementally to preserve surface traces. Within minutes, the edge of a large metal drum container emerged, with construction consistent with a modified small cargo shipping container. The container surface showed rust, but not complete corrosion, indicating protection from direct sun and rain over many years. Sliding soil marks and thin sediment patches over the surface suggested it had been in place for at least 3 or 4 years, consistent with Ethan's disappearance time frame. Once enough soil was cleared to access the door, technical personnel found the door reinforced with hand-welded steel bars and a simple latch lock. After opening entry, the forensic team stepped into the cramped interior space, where clear signs of constrained habitation and modifications for sustaining life in isolation became evident. In the left corner of the container, a crude ventilation system had been cut into the metal wall, lined with PVC pipe extending to the surface, indicating the container had been designed for minimal airflow to sustain life inside, without allowing the occupant to see outside. The container floor was covered in fine dust mixed with fabric fiber fragments, layered in a divergent pattern characteristic of repeated activity in the same position. while the wall edge near the door showed irregular metal scraping consistent with long-term friction from chains or metal rings. In the right corner, the examination team discovered a medium-weight chain and a locking ring attached to a welded floor anchor. The chain exhibited arc-shaped wear, indicating restricted range of motion and that the person was fixed within a narrow radius. Based on the ring size and compression marks on the metal, the engineering team concluded the ring had been used to secure an adult ankle, a detail matching the circular scar doctors identified on Ethan's leg. Adjacent to the chain was a thin wooden plank assembled into a makeshift bed, still bearing dark gray fabric fibers and small indentations indicating prolonged lying. In the opposite area, the FBI found a metal box containing loose items, plastic spoon, torn canned food packaging, toilet paper cores, and other minimal living supplies. Traces of expired canned food from 2010 to 2012 further reinforced the hypothesis that the container had been in continuous use for years, aligning with Ethan's disappearance period. Another key detail appeared on the wall surface: long but shallow parallel horizontal scratches, suggesting the captive may have attempted to mark time or engaged in repetitive stress behavior. The forensic team then collected DNA surface swabs from 3 areas: the chain ring, bed plank, and wall section with highest scratch density. On-site rapid testing revealed DNA matching Ethan's FBI profile, including slowed skin cells and low-concentration biological traces still within reliable thresholds. Additionally, faint fingerprints on the steel bar near the container door were compared to databases and showed points of correspondence with Ethan's indirect DNA samples, indicating prolonged contact with the surface. Notably, several other non-matching fingerprints were recorded and retained for later comparison, most likely belonging to the person who modified or used the container as a confinement structure. During deeper survey, the FBI noted that the container was not merely a holding place but was maintained cyclically, multiple dust layers stratified in periodic deposition patterns, traces of food and water movement leaving stain zones on the floor, and crude heat-shielding fabric panels stapled to walls with small nails. All indicated a structure used to sustain minimal life under controlled, deliberately prolonged conditions. The link between this container and Ethan's disappearance became direct when the FBI cross-referenced 3 datasets, matching DNA traces, injury patterns identified in medical reports, and Paria Plateau soil adhering to the kayak. With all 3 data groups converging on the same physical location, the same confinement structure, and the same consistent survival trace sequence, this container emerged as the central confinement crime scene in the entire case. Based on the strength of trace correspondence, the FBI concluded that Priority Site A was not merely a suspect site, but the actual place where Ethan had been held for a significant portion of his 5-year disappearance. The discovery and examination of the container marked a pivotal turning point in the investigation, shifting the case from hypotheses of forced relocation to clear confirmation that the victim had been confined in a purposefully designed artificial environment, with all evidence recovered from the container proving direct connection to long-term human capture and control. After the container was examined and all samples collected, the FBI moved to the critical phase of the investigation, reconstructing the 5-year captivity timeline through multi-layer forensic analysis to determine not only Ethan's presence periods in the container, but also phases of movement, daily activity restriction levels, and environmental changes reflecting different time markers from 2008 to 2013. The first step of forensic reconstruction focused on analysis of hair, dust, and sediment layers collected from multiple interior locations. Shed hair strands were categorized by length, keratinization degree, external mineral adhesion concentration, and overlying dust layers. Experts identified 3 hair groups with distinct aging profiles, corresponding to 3 phases of the victim's existence. The first group included highly dry hair with uniform Paria soil dust coverage and brittle structure, matching the early disappearance phase when Ethan was likely placed in the container shortly after the sandbar incident. The second group showed reduced dust levels alongside cyclic sweat and salt buildup, reflecting the middle period 2009-2011. when the victim sustained life under limited mobility but still experienced seasonal temperature shifts. The third group, present in smaller but clearest quantity, exhibited weak, thin, low-luster hair with severe malnutrition signs, aligning with the emaciation pattern recorded upon Ethan's reappearance in 2013. In parallel with hair, the forensic team analyzed floor-settled dust and thin sediment layers adhering to walls and items. This dust was divided into bands by compression level and color. The bottommost layer contained the highest Parea soil particle ratio, indicating the container was not fully covered by newer dust at the outset. Upper layers showed increased endogenous fine dust, suggesting the container gradually became a more enclosed living space with reduced external air exchange. Dust stratification by cycle enabled experts to identify 3 existence phases: early phase with high Parea soil and larger dust particles, middle phase dominated by fine dust from human activity in confined space, final phase with extremely fine particle density, thick adhesion, but few fresh soil patches, consistent with minimal container opening in later stages. Combining these analyses, the FBI constructed a time-layered existence sequence in which each stratum reflected changing conditions and interaction levels between victim and confinement space. The next step in forensic reconstruction involved wear pattern analysis on the floor-anchored chain. Mechanical and behavioral specialists used abrasion models to determine chain ring movement extent across phases. Deepest wear concentrated near the anchor hook, indicating that in the early phase Ethan was likely fixed close to the container door, forced to maintain sitting or lying postures in a narrow area. Mid-chain arc-shaped wear reflected a slight increase in movement range during the middle phase, allowing wider radius but still strict limitation. Final wear, light, shallow, and unevenly distributed, matched the late phase, when Ethan's muscle strength had significantly declined and daily movement was restricted due to malnutrition and muscle atrophy. This pattern enabled the FBI to determine not only activity range, but also infer victim psychological and physiological stages, early resistance or frequent movement attempts, middle adaptation to confined space, late emaciation with only small repetitive motions. To expand analysis, the forensic geology team further compared soil samples from various container interior and exterior sediment locations. Soil samples were matched by mineral composition, grain size, and oxidation level, distinguishing periods when the container may have been moved or exposed to external environments. One sample set from the container bottom showed pure Parea Plateau mineral traces, consistent with initial placement at this site. However, another corner sample contained more limestone grains and white placer minerals typical of eastern Parea Canyon side slots, suggesting the container was moved at least once during 2009-2011. A third soil type, darker brown and matching northern canyon trail areas, indicated possible late-phase movement or external disturbance shaking. Integrating soil data with dust, hair, and chain wear data, the FBI reconstructed the container's movement sequence in 3 phases. Phase 1, placement in the Parea Plateau base area with mineral match to kayak soil. Phase 2, evidence of relocation to a side slot with slightly different geology, reflecting a concealment strategy change. Phase 3, fixed long-term retention until Ethan's discovery. Finally, the FBI used all forensic data to build the 2008-2013 captivity timeline. The June-December 2008 period was identified as severe immobilization with no mobility conditions, high Parea soil levels, and chain wear concentrated at the anchor. The 2009-2011 period showed average physical activity levels, increased fine dust, food ration traces via packaging, matching 2010-2012, and evidence of container movement between slots. The 2011-2013 period reflected long-term emaciation, thick fine dust layers, higher shed brittle hair, and markedly reduced chain wear. Collectively, these data formed a unified model of the victim's confinement process, abducted from the sandbar on June 17, 2008, transported into Paria Canyon and held in the container under tightly controlled conditions for 5 years. This forensic timeline enabled the FBI to fully understand the captivity progression, eliminate all prior alternative hypotheses, and affirm that Ethan's survival throughout this period resulted from a deliberate, continuously maintained, and clearly phased structured confinement process. After the forensic reconstruction established the phases of captivity and the key timeline milestones in the captivity process, the FBI decided to re-interview Ethan using the cognitive interviewing method, a technique designed to recover fragmented memories through context-based recall, reconstruction of the sensory environment, and reduction of psychological pressure on the victim. Before starting, the investigative team ensured Ethan was sufficiently physically stable and took psychological support steps to reduce the unconscious defensive state that had formed throughout his captivity period. At this stage, the questions were not aimed at verifying legal details, but at matching memory fragments with the forensic data already obtained. The interview session began by asking Ethan to describe the last moments at the sandbar again, but instead of asking directly as before, the investigator encouraged him to close his eyes and recall the space, sounds, and bodily sensations. With this approach, Ethan gradually remembered that as he was preparing to leave the sandbar under Navajo Bridge, there was the sound of crunching gravel behind him and a figure appeared near the kayak. He couldn't clearly see the face, but he distinctly recalled the surprise when someone touched his shoulder from behind, followed by a sudden blow that caused him to lose balance. This timeline matched the crime scene evidence, the distinct footprints, and the drag marks of an object into the brush. When asked to describe the vehicle, Ethan recalled the smell of old gasoline, the uneven engine roar, and the metal floor vibrating under his back as he was pulled into the truck bed, features consistent with the description of the old pickup that a witness had seen. When questioned about the time from the blow to complete loss of consciousness, Ethan recalled that everything happened very quickly. Darkness, a cramped feeling, shaking space, then the sound of a metal door closing before he slipped into a state where he could no longer control his body. This aligned with the hypothesis that he was removed from the sandbar by motorized vehicle right in the midday of June 17, 2008. Moving to the phase of describing captivity conditions, cognitive interviewing helped Ethan recover details he had previously been unable to articulate. He spoke of the initial phase in complete darkness when he could not distinguish day from night and only heard someone opening the container door at irregular intervals during the first week. This matched the thick paria dust layer and deep chain wear identified in the early forensic phase. Ethan described being restrained by cold metal rings clamped around his ankles, creating a burning pain every time he tried to move. These descriptions perfectly matched the chain recovered at the scene and the circular scar on his left ankle documented by doctors. When guided to describe using different senses rather than chronological order, Ethan recalled recurring sounds, footsteps on gravel outside the container, light metal clinking when food was placed down, and the irregular rhythm of the door opening and closing. These sounds indicated that the captivity cycle was not fixed but changed over time, a structure highly consistent with the three-phase captivity model built by forensics. When asked about food, Ethan described the smell of canned goods, especially beans and canned meat, often old, sometimes with a metallic taste. This matched the canned packaging recovered from the container, which had expiration dates of 2010-2012. Notably, when prompted to describe changes over time, Ethan recalled that in the second and third years, the space seemed to change, the echo was different, the ground under the floor was drier, and some days the wind sounded stronger than usual. These details supported the hypothesis that the container was moved between side branches of Paria Canyon, consistent with the differences in soil composition identified in the middle phase by forensics. When analyzing the periodic movement cycle, Ethan described that sometimes he felt the container shake slightly, as if impacted from outside, especially in the mornings. He also described days when food arrived late or not at all, causing him to lose track of time. This data matched the evenly changing fine dust layers, showing that the container door was opened on a cycle, but not absolutely fixed. In the final phase, Ethan described emaciation, loss of muscle strength sensation, colder body, and long days without any light even from the weak vent slit. These details aligned with forensics: high hair loss, significantly increased muscle atrophy, and reduced chain wear, indicating Ethan no longer had much ability to move. When the investigator asked him to try describing in reverse order, this method elicited memories related to environmental change milestones. Ethan remembered a point when he no longer heard water, a crucial detail because the canyon, where the container was found, was far from the Colorado River, indicating he had been taken away from the river area early on. When the interview data was linked to the forensic reconstruction, the FBI could redraw the captivity timeline with higher accuracy. Ethan was abducted at midday on June 17, 2008, removed from the sandbar by pickup. The complete darkness phase occurred during the first 6-9 months. The container was moved at least once between Paria Canyon side branches during 2009-2011, and in the final 2 years, the victim was held in harsher conditions with almost no movement until he escaped and appeared at Marble Canyon Ranger Station in 2013. Thanks to combining detailed testimony and forensic data, the captivity timeline was solidly reinforced, while also confirming Ethan as the victim of an organized, calculated, and years-long abduction process. After the captivity timeline was solidified through detailed testimony and forensic data, the FBI shifted to the phase of surveilling Caleb Rourke to gather direct behavioral evidence before proceeding with arrest. Within 72 hours, the investigative team deployed a combined static and mobile surveillance model using covert observation points around Rourke's remote residence area while positioning unmarked vehicles to follow the routes he commonly used to travel between his home and the adjacent Paria Plateau region. The static surveillance system recorded that Rourke had an erratic schedule, rarely leaving the house during the day, but moving short distances into the western wilderness in early mornings and late afternoons along little-known routes, similar to the movement pattern identified by forensic reconstruction during Ethan's captivity period. On 2 consecutive mornings, mobile surveillance observed Rourke loading various items into the pickup bed, including small fuel cans, a coil of rope, and a set of mechanical tools. Although no overt criminal behavior was observed, this combination of items matched types he had purchased cyclically over many years and was especially consistent with the pattern of deep desert travel to access secluded locations. By the 3rd day, surveillance noted Rourke leaving home earlier than usual, packing a large backpack with water and food, an action suggesting he might be preparing to enter deep Paria Canyon areas or adjacent remote zones. This prompted the command team to assess a high risk that Rourke might be preparing to leave the area, move to a former holding site, or even destroy remaining evidence. Immediately, the FBI requested activation of a federal arrest warrant and coordinated with local SWAT to ensure safe approach without giving the suspect a chance to escape. The arrest plan was executed at Big Water, where narrow roads from Arizona converge and where Rourke often stopped as an intermediate point before heading deeper into dirt roads. When Rourke's pickup appeared on the Big Water approach road, SWAT quickly blocked access and egress with 2 light armored vehicles, while tactical teams closed in from both directions to prevent the suspect from turning around or fleeing into the desert. The arrest warrant was executed as soon as Rourke's vehicle stopped at the checkpoint. He was subdued with no significant resistance, and the vehicle was sealed per evidence preservation protocol. During inspection of the truck bed and cabin, the FBI seized several items consistent with preparation for movement into isolated areas, but most notably a paper map of the Paria Canyon, Glen Canyon region. On this map, investigators discovered multiple pencil markings, some along rarely traveled dirt roads, and one marked precisely at Priority Site A, the location where Ethan's holding container was found. Additionally, Two other marks indicated side canyons deep within the system, matching areas where prior geological analysis had identified signs of container movement during the first and third years of captivity. These notes, though without accompanying explanatory text, demonstrated deep knowledge of the terrain and habitual use of isolated locations as stopover or hiding points. The seizure of the map marked with key locations directly tied to Ethan's captivity timeline became one of the strongest pieces of evidence proving the connection between Rourke and the 5-year-long detention process. Combined with 72-hour surveillance data, preparation behavior for desert movement, and signs of reusing familiar routes, the FBI confirmed that the timing of the arrest was reasonable and necessary to prevent the suspect from destroying or reaccessing critical sites in the case. After Caleb Rourke was arrested at Big Water and evidence from the vehicle as well as suspect locations was verified, the FBI, in coordination with the U.S. Attorney's Office, began constructing the formal indictment, in which 3 major felony charges were filed: kidnapping under Title 18 U.S.C. Section 1201, unlawful confinement due to holding the victim in coercive conditions for many years, and aggravated assault related to causing serious injury to Ethan during abduction and sustained control. The indictment was drafted based on a comprehensive integration of physical evidence, forensic documentation, victim testimony, geological data, and behavioral analysis, forming a seamless chain of argument from the initial approach of the victim at the sandbar under Navajo Bridge through 5 years of captivity in Paria Canyon. The centerpiece of the physical evidence presentation was the match of Ethan's DNA recovered from the container, the victim's fingerprints, and some unidentified fingerprints belonging to the suspect, large shoe prints matching Rourke's shoe size at the sandbar, and the container structure showing full signs of modification to sustain life in an isolated space. Soil samples from the kayak body were presented as decisive evidence proving forced relocation. Paria Plateau minerals could not appear on the kayak without human intervention. The forensic expert team presented the captivity timeline using hair layering, dust, sediment, and chain wear analysis, allowing the jury to understand the prolonged, deliberate, and organized nature of the detention. The timeline was cross-referenced with Ethan's testimony obtained via cognitive interviewing to demonstrate high consistency between fragmented memory and physical traces recovered. Next, the prosecution presented Rourke's behavioral history, including hiker surveillance reports from 2005, 2007, isolated activity habits, fuel and mechanical supply purchase cycles, and movement patterns matching the early and middle phases of captivity. These were used to prove repeated behavior and target selection capability, reinforcing motive and capacity to commit the crime. The maps seized from the suspect's vehicle, including the Paria Canyon map marked with Priority Site A and 2 subsidiary locations, were displayed in court as visual evidence of terrain knowledge and intent to use remote points as holding or transit sites. During cross-examination, the defense attempted to question the accuracy of the forensic timeline, arguing that dust, hair, and sediment could be contaminated due to desert conditions. However, forensic experts countered with detailed mineral analyses, proving each dust and hair layer carried distinct temporal and environmental characteristics that could not result from random external factors. When all evidence was presented, the jury deliberated for over 8 hours. During this time, they reviewed more than 120 pages of physical evidence, 40 pages of forensic timeline, and river flow 2 dissimulation depicting the impossible kayak trajectory absent human intervention. The combination of DNA, chain marks, shoe prints, container structure, and suspect maps played a central role in clearly establishing that Ethan did not suffer a river accident but was forcibly taken into captivity, and the only person capable of executing that complex sequence of actions was Caleb Rourke. The jury's verdict was unanimous. 12/12 members found Rourke guilty on all 3 major felony counts as charged. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment without parole for kidnapping, plus 35 years for unlawful confinement and aggravated assault, to be served consecutively rather than concurrently to reflect the exceptional severity of holding a human in inhumane conditions for many years. This ruling concluded the federal trial and is recorded as one of the harshest sentences related to long-term abduction and detention in the southwestern United States. Immediately after the federal sentence for Caleb Rourke was pronounced, the FBI shifted focus to the post-investigation assessment to determine whether Ethan Kade's abduction and detention was an isolated act or part of a broader years-long pattern of activity. Based on Rourke's behavioral record and cyclical movement data collected during the investigation, the Special Task Force decided to reopen 5 cold case files of missing kayakers and hikers from 2003-2012 along the stretch from Lee's Ferry to Paria Canyon side branches and extending to the Utah border area. These disappearances had previously been classified as environmental accidents or getting lost in desert terrain, but lacked sufficient data for a specific conclusion at the time. Upon recomparison, investigators noticed significant behavioral motif similarities in the victims' disappearances. All vanished at intersections between popular travel routes and lesser-known side trails. Their vehicles or gear were found in conditions inconsistent with natural accidents, and crime scenes contained anomalous elements that previously lacked sufficient weight for criminal investigation. The forensic geology team continued playing a key role by reanalyzing soil samples collected but not deeply tested in prior years. 3 of the 5 old cases showed sediment adhering to shoes, backpacks or victim gear, with significant matches to the Montmorillonite, dolomite soil of Paria Plateau, similar to the soil on Ethan's kayak. This led the team to hypothesize that prior victims may have been lured or forced off main routes into remote areas familiar to Rourke. When analyzing Rourke's travel routes throughout 2005-2012, the FBI identified multiple intersections between the suspect's itinerary and the timing and locations of old disappearances. Some fuel receipts, purchase records, and limited cell tower location data showed he was present in the broad western Paria Canyon area on the same days 2 victims missing in 2006 and 2010 were last seen. Combining these facts with ranger reports, noting Rourke's presence on narrow canyon trails, the team determined that the target approach motif, distant observation of victims, choosing low witness moments, and exploiting terrain isolation may have been repeated in multiple instances. The geological, route, and behavioral similarities led the FBI to argue that Ethan's detention was not an exception, but likely part of a chain of actions spanning nearly a decade. Although not all disappearances had sufficient evidence for criminal prosecution, many met criteria for further federal investigation. Therefore, the FBI officially reclassified the 5 cases from missing under unknown circumstances to suspected third-party intervention. This decision paved the way for a larger-scale federal investigation focused on tracing remaining terrain indicators, cross-referencing DNA, and searching for other potential holding sites across the broad area from Marble Canyon to Paria Plateau. The expanded probe also aimed to determine how many victims remain unfound, or how many cases previously deemed environmental accidents actually involved criminal elements. The linkage between Rourke and disappearance markers spanning 2003 to 2012 moved the investigation into a long-term federal phase, requiring cooperation among the FBI, Park Service, geological agencies, and Arizona, Utah state authorities to review every anomaly potentially tied to this complex criminal motif. Ethan Kade's story is not only an extraordinary survival journey, but also clearly reflects very real issues in today's United States. From the dangers of solo travel in wilderness areas to the importance of personal safety, vigilance toward strangers, and the power of community in observing and reporting unusual behavior. In Ethan's case, everything began with a seemingly minor detail, the appearance of a man in a gray hat and an old pickup at the sandbar under Navajo Bridge. The witness at the time saw it only as coincidence, but that description later became a crucial puzzle piece in narrowing down the suspect. It shows that in modern life, community attention, what we see, hear, and report, can make a life or death difference in missing persons investigation. Today, Americans frequently engage in outdoor activities, hiking, kayaking, camping. These bring great mental value, but Ethan's story reminds us that every solo journey requires serious preparation, informing family of the itinerary, carrying two-way locator devices, checking safety points along the route, and observing surrounding anomalies. The sudden shutdown of Ethan's spot device was a warning sign that search teams could not explain at the time. Another key lesson is criminals' ability to operate in under-monitored regions, as Caleb Rourke used Paria Canyon and side dirt roads to evade detection for years. This reminds us that safety depends not only on the individual, but also requires technological development, community monitoring, and federal cooperation mechanisms in tracking. Finally, Ethan's story demonstrates the power of persistence and forensic science. Reinvestigation using new technology, river flow 2D flow simulation, Paria Plateau soil analysis, and forensic reconstruction shattered initial false assumptions. That is a lesson for every field of American life. Do not judge an event only by its surface, and when data changes, we must be ready to change our understanding as well. Thank you for following this haunting yet inspiring story of Ethan Kade's journey home. If you found it meaningful, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss deep analyses of cases like this. See you in the next video, where we continue exploring true stories that can change the way we view safety and everyday life.